What happened in a Chicago theater changed the career of one of the city's most respected actors. A man who used to mock the faith of others discovered that there are presences on stage that no script can predict. A miracle of the Virgin Mary that turned mockery into silence. But before we continue, leave a comment saying where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I'd love to see how far the miracles of the Virgin Mary are reaching. You know that actor everyone admires? The one who fills the theater, who can make people cry with just a look? William Lewis Brennan was that actor, 41 years old, 20 years in the business, 3 regional awards. Critics said he had a magnetic stage presence, the kind of actor who, when he stepped on stage, made you forget you were watching a play. William lived in a modern apartment downtown. The walls were covered with posters from old productions, shelves lined with marked-up scripts, trophies resting on the mantel. He lived alone, divorced for 5 years, no children. Theater was his life. And William was proud of that. He was known in theater circles for his dedication. He had arrived 2 hours before everyone else to warm up his voice. He studied every word of the script until he knew not only his lines, but everyone else's as well. But there was something else about William. Something he didn't hide. He didn't believe in anything beyond the stage. During cast dinners, whenever someone mentioned faith, William would look away, crack a joke, and that short smile of his would end the conversation. People got the message. In March 2023, William was cast in the lead role of a new production, an intense drama about a man who finds hope again after personal tragedy. The role was perfect for him, complex, emotional, full of layers. There was just one detail. The play was deeply Catholic. The character had long scenes of prayer. There was an entire monologue dedicated to the Virgin Mary. The climax involved the protagonist kneeling before a statue of the Virgin Mary, asking for a sign. William accepted the role without hesitation. It was work. It was art. He could play anything. What he didn't say was what he really thought about the material. Rehearsals began on a cold Monday. The theater was a historic building, a wooden stage worn by time, heavy red curtains, velvet seats that had witnessed thousands of performances. The cast was small, 8 actors in total. William in the lead, a veteran actress as his mother in the play, and 6 supporting actors. From the first rehearsal, it was clear there was a divide in the group. 3 of the actors were practicing Catholics. For them, this play was more than work. It was personal. Sarah, who played the protagonist's sister, carried a rosary in her pocket and prayed before every rehearsal. Robert Miller, one of the supporting actors, had grown up in a traditional Catholic family. And then there was Margaret, the veteran actress who played the mother, a woman in her early 60s with decades of theater behind her and a faith she never hid. William noticed that on the first day, and he decided it wasn't his problem. In the second week of rehearsals during a break, the cast was in the dressing room having coffee. Sarah was reading her lines softly, preparing for a scene. It was the one where her character convinces the protagonist to visit a church. William was sitting in the corner, looking at his phone when he heard Sarah murmur a prayer before starting to read her lines. He let out a short laugh. Sarah stopped reading and looked at him. "Something funny?" "Nothing," William said, still looking at his phone. "I just thought it was interesting that you need to pray before pretending to pray." The dressing room went silent. Sarah looked at him for a long moment, then went back to her script without replying. Robert, who was sitting next to her, frowned, but said nothing either. In the following days, the comments continued. During the rehearsal of a scene where William's character visited a chapel, he stopped midway through the blocking. "Just a quick question," he said to the director, a calm man named Thomas. "Does my character really need to stay kneeling here for that long? It feels a bit too much." Thomas checked the script. "It's important for the emotional pacing. He's processing everything that happened." "Right." But the tone made it clear what he really thought. Margaret, who was watching the rehearsal from the front row, felt something tighten in her chest. She had worked with hundreds of actors over the years. She recognized disdain when she saw it. By the third week, during the rehearsal of the main monologue, the scene where the protagonist stands before the image of the Virgin Mary, William was struggling with emotion. "Again," Thomas said for the fifth time. William sighed, got into position, and knelt before the image that would be used in the play. He began the lines. The words were beautiful, carefully written. They spoke of hope, surrender, and longing. But they came out of William's mouth completely hollow. "Cut," Thomas said. "William, you're saying the words, but you're not connected to them. It's hard to feel something for—" William stopped, looked at the image. "For a statue." Sarah, who was backstage waiting for her cue, felt anger rising inside her. "For a statue?" she repeated, stepping out from the wings. "You mean the Virgin Mary?" Michael stood up, brushing dust from his knees. "Sarah, relax. It's just a play. You don't have to take it that seriously." "Don't have to take it seriously?" Her voice trembled. "It's sacred to millions of people. To me, it's sacred." William turned to her. "Look, Sarah, no offense, but it's hard to feel anything genuine when I'm talking to a 2,000-year-old statue that supposedly still cares about what happens today." Thomas stepped in before the argument could escalate. "Let's take a 20-minute break. Everyone, cool off." The cast dispersed, but the tension hung in the air. That night, Michael went home irritated. He couldn't understand why everyone was being so sensitive. It was just theater, just a play. But something inside him was unsettled. It wasn't Sarah's words. It was the scene itself. Those lines about the Virgin Mary, about hope, about faith. By the fourth week, the tension in the cast was palpable. William knew some of the actors were uncomfortable with him. He noticed the glances, the conversations that stopped when he entered the room. But he was a professional. The work went on. And then came that Tuesday. It was April 18th, an ordinary day, cloudy sky, mild temperature for spring. Thomas had scheduled a technical rehearsal for the evening, lighting, sound, and set adjustments. The premiere was 10 days away. "I'll need some of you to stay after the main rehearsal," Thomas announced, "to adjust the light marks. William, especially you, for the monologue." William nodded. No problem. He had the night free. The regular rehearsal ended at 9 p.m. The cast went home, exhausted. Even Thomas left, saying he'd return in half an hour with the lighting technician. William stayed alone in the theater. It wasn't unusual. He often stayed after rehearsals to practice, to feel the space without the pressure of other actors. He walked across the stage, testing the marks, whispering lines to himself. He went to the set prepared for the climax, a small improvised altar with the image of the Virgin Mary. William stopped in front of it. For some reason, he wanted to test the scene one more time, to see if he could find the emotion Thomas had been asking for. He knelt as the script demanded. He began the monologue. "Our Lady, I don't know if anyone is listening or if I'm just talking to silence." The familiar words, rehearsed dozens of times. But then William stopped. He looked at the plaster image. "Why do millions of people waste their whole lives believing in this?" he murmured, staring at the image, talking to statues, waiting for answers that never come. He stood up, pacing the stage. "It's pathetic, really." His voice echoed through the empty theater. He stopped in front of the image again, crossing his arms. "And you," he said, pointing at the replica, "you are the greatest illusion of all." He laughed, a bitter sound. Silence. William sighed, preparing to go back and rehearse the scene again, and then he felt it. The temperature in the theater changed. It wasn't the air conditioning. It was different, a warmth that seemed to come from nowhere. William froze, frowning. He looked around. The lights were in the same position, the doors closed. He was alone. But something was different. Then came the scent. Roses, fresh, intense, impossible in a closed theater in the middle of April. William turned slowly, his heart beginning to race. The image of the Virgin Mary was in the same place, but there was something there that hadn't been before. A presence. "Thomas?" William called, his voice weaker than he intended. "Are you back?" No answer. The scent of roses grew stronger. And then William saw it was someone real standing there. A woman, a deep blue mantle, dark hair framing a young face, but with eyes that seemed to have seen centuries. William tried to speak, but no sound came out. It wasn't possible. He was alone. The door was closed. No one had entered, but she was there, real, solid, present. Her eyes met his, and William felt something he had never felt before. Terror, not of being harmed, but of being seen, completely seen. Every thought, every doubt, every moment of contempt, all laid bare before that gaze. He wanted to run, to scream, to do anything but stand there, frozen. The woman didn't speak. She didn't need to, because William understood, with a clarity that shattered all his defenses. She was real. She had always been real. William fell to his knees, not a rehearsed cue, but something involuntary. His hands trembled. His breath faltered. I didn't know. The words came out broken. I didn't believe. The presence remained, silent. And then William felt something impossible. A hand, warm, gentle, real, touching his shoulder. There was no one physically near him, but he felt it, as clearly as he felt the cold stage floor beneath his knees. A touch that spoke without words. I know. And yet, here I am. William didn't know how long he stayed there, kneeling, trembling. When he finally managed to lift his eyes, the Virgin Mary was gone. Only the plaster statue remained on the altar, but the scent of roses still filled the air. And William Lewis Brennan, the actor who believed in nothing beyond the stage, knew with absolute certainty that what had just happened was more real than anything he had ever performed. He was sitting on the floor of the stage, his back against the set wall, when Thomas returned 20 minutes later. "William, are you okay?" William looked up. His face was pale, eyes red. Sorry, Thomas. I'm not feeling well. I need to go home." Thomas frowned, worried. "Do you want me to call someone?" "No, I just need to go." William stood up with difficulty, grabbed his backpack, and left the theater. The walk to his apartment was a blur. The streets were busy, but William barely noticed. His mind kept replaying what had happened. His hands were still shaking. The scent of roses still clung to his clothes. Impossible, considering he had left the theater several minutes ago. When he reached his apartment, he locked the door and stood, motionless, in the dark hallway for a long moment. Then he walked to the living room window and looked down at the city lights below. "What just happened?" he said aloud to the empty apartment. Part of him, the rational, logical part, trained by years of skepticism, was already working on explanations. Stress. You're overworked. You've been rehearsing this religious play intensely for weeks. But another part, a part William didn't recognize, whispered, "You know what you saw. You know what you felt." William didn't sleep that night. At 3 in the morning, he was in the kitchen making coffee he didn't intend to drink. He grabbed his laptop, typed, "Stress-induced hallucinations." That makes sense, he thought. It's logical. But then he remembered the touch on his shoulder. Dawn came, and William was still awake. He showered, got dressed. Prepared to go to the theater, as on any other day. But nothing was like any other day. On the subway, he observed the people around him, an elderly woman praying softly, fingering the beads of a rosary. A young man with a simple cross around his neck. Do they know something I don't? Or are they all deceiving themselves? But what if? William shook his head, trying to dismiss the thoughts. He arrived at the theater 2 hours before rehearsal, as he always did. But this time, it wasn't to warm up his voice. It was to look at the image of the Virgin Mary on the makeshift altar. She was exactly where she had always been. Plain plaster, a serene expression painted decades ago by some unknown craftsman. William approached slowly, stopped a few feet away. "Was it you?" he asked softly. "Last night, was it you?" Silence. No scent of roses, no presence, no answer. "See? You imagined everything." But the rational voice was weaker now. Sarah was the first to arrive. She found William sitting on the stage floor, simply staring at the image. "Good morning, William." He turned. He looked as if he had aged 10 years overnight. "Good morning, Sarah." She hesitated, sensing something different. "May I sit?" William gestured to the space beside him. They sat in silence for a few minutes. "Sarah," William finally said, his voice low, "can I ask you a strange question?" "Of course." "When you pray, how do you know you're not just talking to yourself?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "Sometimes I don't know," she answered honestly. "There are days when it feels like I'm just talking to the air, and there are days when, I don't know, I feel something. A peace that doesn't come from me, an answer I didn't think of myself." William absorbed her words. "And that's enough? Not knowing for sure?" "Faith isn't about certainty, William. It's about trust, even without all the answers." He was quiet for so long that Sarah thought the conversation was over. "What if I told you," William began, "that something happened last night, something I can't explain?" Sarah's heart quickened. "I'd believe you." William looked at her, searching for any trace of judgment or mockery. He found only genuine sincerity. "I don't know if I saw it, felt it, or imagined it. But it was real in a way nothing else in my life has ever been." Tears burned in Sarah's eyes. "You were visited," she said softly. "That's a blessing, William." "I don't deserve it," he replied, almost a whisper. "That's the essence of a blessing. No one deserves it. It's a gift, freely given." During that day's rehearsal, everyone noticed something different about William. He was quiet, quieter than he had ever been. He answered when spoken to, followed the cues, knew his lines. But there was a distraction in him, as if part of his mind was somewhere else. When the monologue scene came, William positioned himself before the image. Thomas watched, expecting to see the same lack of connection as always. But when William knelt and began to speak, something had changed. "Our Lady? I don't know if anyone is hearing me or if I'm just talking to the silence." It still wasn't perfect. There was still hesitation, still doubt. But for the first time, there was truth. Thomas didn't interrupt. He let the scene run until the end. When William stood up, there were real tears in his eyes, tears he didn't try to hide. Everyone stayed silent for a moment. "That was different," Thomas said carefully. "Very different. What changed?" William wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. I'm trying to understand the character better." But Margaret, sitting in the front row where she always sat, saw more than the others. She had lived 62 years. She had seen people change. She had seen faith being born. And she recognized the signs. That night, after everyone had gone, William stayed alone in the theater once again. He walked up to the stage and looked at the image of the Virgin Mary. Part of him expected, almost wanted it to happen again. The scent of roses, the presence, the absolute certainty. But nothing came. Only silence. William felt frustration rise in his chest. Why yesterday, yes, and today, no, he said aloud. If it was real, why not show me again? Why not give me certainty? He stood there, waiting. Nothing. This is ridiculous, he muttered to himself. I'm losing my mind. Opening night arrived. The house was packed, all the seats taken, people standing in the back. The local critics had come, producers from other theaters. It was the kind of audience that could make or break a career. Backstage, William stood in his dressing room staring at his reflection in the mirror. He looked the same as always, flawless costume, makeup applied, hair in place. But he knew he was not the same man who had started rehearsals weeks earlier. A knock on the door. The stage assistant. 5 minutes. William nodded. The first scenes flowed. The audience was engaged. William could feel their attention, that particular kind of silence that meant they were truly present. And then came the moment. The monologue. William walked to the center of the stage. The light followed him, narrowing until it was just him and the image of the Virgin Mary on the makeshift altar. 400 people watching. But at that moment, it could have been only him. He knelt and began the scripted words, the same ones he had rehearsed dozens of times. Our Lady. I don't know who else to turn to. The doctors have given up. My family has drifted away. I'm alone in this struggle. But this time, the words came out differently, because William understood now. He understood the character's despair, the loneliness, the search for something greater when everything else had failed. They say you listen to those who suffer, that you intercede for the lost. His voice trembled, not from technique, but from memory, from that night in the empty theater, from the scent of roses, from the touch he couldn't explain. I don't know if I deserve your help, but I'm asking anyway. Real tears in his eyes now. Because if you're not here, if there's nothing but silence, then I don't know how to go on. The character clasped his hands in prayer, and William felt the gesture differently now. It was surrender. So I give it up. Everything I can't control, everything I can't fix on my own, I give it to you. Pause. Absolute silence in the theater. Now all I can ask is, don't let me give up. When William finished and slowly stood, his legs trembling, there was a moment of complete silence. Then, applause. But not the polite kind. It was the recognition of having witnessed something true, a performance that transcended technique. After the play backstage, William was surrounded by people, but he was looking for only one person. He found Sarah near the dressing room. It was real, William, she said when their eyes met. He nodded, unable to speak, because he knew she was right. He had played the character, yes, but he had also poured his own journey into those words. And he discovered that the line between acting and truth was thinner than he had ever believed. Later that night, after everyone had left, William stayed alone in the theater one last time. He walked to the stage, looked at the image of the Virgin Mary. "Thank you," he whispered, "for showing me I was wrong." He stood there for a few more minutes in silence. Then he left the theater. Outside, the night was clear. And for the first time in years, William didn't feel alone. 3 months later, the play became the most successful production that theater had seen in a decade. William received offers from larger theaters, but something far more important was happening. William started attending the same church as Sarah, not out of obligation, but because he needed to. He began to pray again, not memorized prayers, but honest conversations, and he discovered that the Virgin Mary, the one he once believed wasn't real, had now become his greatest intercessor. Margaret found him after a Mass. "How are you, William?" "Different," he replied. "Every day feels different. I still have questions. I still doubt sometimes, but now I know that doubting is part of the journey." Now I want to make a special thank you to the first 20 people who shared their faith in the comments. And remember, the next 20 people who leave a comment on this video will also appear in the next one. Thank you for being part of this community of faith. And look, if you made it this far to the end of William's story, do one thing for me. Write in the comments, "Stage," the place where everything changed. I want to see how many hearts this story truly reached. And every time I read "stage" in the comments, I'll know that one more person believes that miracles of the Virgin Mary still happen. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. Share this video with someone who needs to renew their hope today. May the Virgin Mary continue to bless and protect you and your family. Amen.